Welcome back to Designsmith. In this video, we are continuing our series on weekly favorites to give you some design inspiration. Before we get started, please subscribe to support the channel. Alright, first up is this really cool Bauhaus design. It's been a little bit since I've talked about any kind of Bauhaus on the channel. I actually really miss making Bauhaus designs, so I'm going to start doing that pretty soon. Look for one next week. But this one right here is a really cool composition. We've got this kind of a rotated S going on right here. And what's really nice about this is really just the composition and how that S is being slightly rotated over and how everything else is following along with it. Some people would probably take a look at this and think that you have to rotate the S first and then rotate everything else afterward. But you should actually design it straight up and down first and then do the rotation after you've added everything onto it. And it's making great use of those classic Bauhaus colors. The only one that it's not really using is blue, but there's not a rule that says you have to use all Bauhaus colors in a Bauhaus design. And even though there's a lot of information going on here, it's laid out beautifully. It's got just enough elements to not be overwhelming and look too busy. And it's also using a combination of traditional Bauhaus typography along with Swiss typography. That's really cool. Of course, Swiss design was born out of Bauhaus design, so that kind of makes sense. But overall, it's just really cool, and for some reason, this little collection of elements right in here is making me think of a windshield wiper. Is anybody else seeing that? Alright, the next one up is one of the coolest posters that I've seen in the last couple of weeks. This is a very cool design, and it gives an awesome sense of perspective. This is something that as designers we can tend to lose sight of, is really making sure that we include a sense of perspective and depth in our designs. I mean, yeah, you can set type at smaller and larger sizes to make it look like some type is further set back and others are further set forward. But this one right here looks like these blocks are towering above you. Even though you're looking at it straight on, it feels like you're looking up at it. And the use of the red here just further reinforces that idea. And it's really interesting when you consider that this is really just an ad for a font. It wasn't necessarily meant to be used as a poster, but this could inspire poster designs, and I could see it being used for so many different things. In fact, I may do something myself based on this design. It's just so cool. Alright, next up is a little bit of color palette inspiration for you. I'm a huge sucker for yellow, orange, and blue. Those are my three favorite colors. So anytime I see something like this, I just gotta throw it in here. It's not using any typography here, but this is a great example of how to use a color palette effectively. When you're putting together a general composition, something like this, keep in mind that your colors can be a little all over the place. This is meant to represent a sunrise or a sunset over the water, and you can really see a lot of different colors when you're looking at that. And not just the reflections of the sky, there's also the sun, and you may even see like one stripe of green right here. And don't be afraid to use one color one time. And even though it's not advertising anything specifically, this would make a really cool piece of art to hang on your wall. Alright, next up is another Bauhaus design. I saw this one earlier this week and just thought it was so cool. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be directly representing something visually or not, but the use of color here is just really cool, and it's also very outside the norm for Bauhaus. You don't see a lot of people using pink, and you don't really see a whole lot of designs going outside of the traditional red, yellow, blue, black, and white. Although you do see that sometimes, and I even made a video talking about how you're not limited to the traditional Bauhaus color palette. You can check that out right up here if you're interested. But I love how these lines are going down and they kind of branch out like this, go into this circle, and they've got that circle contained inside of this circle right here. It's just so cool looking. It's something that when you first look at it looks a little bit complex, but when you study it and actually know how all of these things work, you see how simple it is, and simple is very effective. So overall, very cool design and very unique. Alright, next up is this really cool David Bowie poster here, and this is also a very simple method being used in Photoshop. What they've done here is take this uppercase B and pasted it into Photoshop, and then they took this picture of David right here, and they're masking it inside of this B. I've done a couple of videos where I teach this technique, but I think I'm actually going to do something that focuses more on this exact type of blending. So keep an eye out for that pretty soon. Hopefully I'll get to it next week. But beyond just the blending of the photo and the bee itself, the typography here is beautiful. I love the mix of sans serif and serif here. This is something you don't really see a whole lot of. It is a little bit more of a traditional view. I remember when I was in design school, they said to keep it to no more than 2 to 3 fonts. And that's kind of evolved now into just one universal font. But I still really enjoy the balance of 2 fonts going on. And I love how everything is grayscale except for the type in this column right here. It's an interesting choice to make this column reddish orange and everything else black. It really helps to balance David's face right down here. All right, next up is a Swiss design right here, and I'm pretty sure this was designed on a grid. There's not a whole lot of stuff going on here, but it's very simple and effective in its communication. We've got a red circle in the center, and we've got concentric circles that are getting darker as they go out. And the way that these circles stack on each other, as well as the colors themselves, it's really playing tricks on my eyes here. It looks like we've got some areas in here that are darker than others, even though that's not actually going on. It's a really nice effect that creates a cool illusion. And the font being used here, I'm just gonna guess it might be Helvetica, I'm not entirely sure. But it's obviously a grotesque font inspired by Swiss design. And we've got these two columns lined up here, everything is spaced out really nicely. This is a very well put together design for TEDx. All right, next up is this really cool oranges and blue poster. Like I said before, I'm a huge sucker for orange and blue, although I probably would have liked it a little bit better if the blue were a little bit darker or maybe even a little bit lighter, but I think that these two colors still work very well together. I'm sorry I couldn't find a higher resolution version of this, but this is just a really cool layout here. It's obviously a Swiss design. I don't know what any of the content in here means, but just from a visual perspective, I love that giant blue circle along with the very tiny type going on right up here. The proportions and the sizing are absolutely perfect. I made a video discussing a formula on how to size your type for Swiss designs, so check that out right up here if you're interested. Overall, really cool composition and also really good practice if you're wanting to get into Swiss design and then also get to know the Pathfinder better. Next up is another orange poster, and this is such a cool poster right here. It's for Finding Nemo. You could argue that it's a Swiss design, although I would call it a little bit more minimalist. And we've got really good balance going on down here. I really think it's interesting that everything in the type is all centered at the bottom here. We've got really good negative space going on in this area. And then the eye itself is not centered, it's actually slightly off center. And that creates even more visual interest. You don't always want to perfectly center stuff. Of course, it also depends on exactly what you're designing. If you were to line up these two next to each other, it makes sense that this circle right here would be centered, because this poster on the left is more likely presenting more technical information, so you would want that directly centered on your page. And then the Finding Nemo poster is more rooted in fun because it's advertising a kids movie. So you would expect that eye to be slightly off center and not dead in the center. And I apologize that I just called Finding Nemo a kids movie. It is an awesome movie. And also, I was today years old when I found out that Finding Nemo came out in 2003 and not 2004 like I've thought for the past 20 years. All right, next up is this really, really cool poster right here. This is for the show Euphoria. I've never actually seen this show. I've heard good things about it, but I'm not really here to talk about the show. Let's talk about the poster. The type layout up here is just beautiful. This is rooted in Swiss design, and this is something that you don't really see too much of going on. You've got an image on the left side and then the two columns of type right here. It's laid out a little bit more like a magazine type of layout, but it still stems from Swiss design principles. And I love this kind of swishy, ghosty type of effect that we've got going on right here. I actually did something similar to this a couple of months ago, but it's obviously being aligned to a grid. I do think it's interesting that the type down here doesn't line up with the edge of the image right here. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. This could be a gutter happening in between here. And I love the use of all the extra things that are going on here. This little symbol right up here is really cool. It's giving it some great balance in this section. And then we've got the A24 right here. What's really nice about the placement of these logos is it doesn't look like an afterthought. They look like they were intended to be there the whole time. And then these little blocks up here representing the colors that are down here, just a really cool touch. I've done a couple of posters similar to this, but I don't think I've done any for the channel, so I may do something like that in the future. All right, last up is this really cool Helvetica poster. I've actually tried my hand at this, and it's a little bit more difficult than you would think. I looked at this and thought, oh, it's all type on a path. But there's a lot more that goes into it, and if I can actually figure out how to do it effectively and teach it really well, then I'll make sure to do that in the future. But I just love how these lines of type are making up what looks like these buildings right here. And these little lines of type where there's extra spaces in between the letters just to give it a little bit more depth. Those are just really nice touches. And it's a great way to showcase how the font can be used, and it also shows its durability and legibility. After all, where would we be without Helvetica? Some people call it the most overrated font of all time. It might be, but nobody can argue its legacy. All right, here's everything that we looked at today. There's a lot of orange and red going on. I didn't even realize that until right now. If there's anything here you'd like to see me cover in future videos, let me know down in the comments below. I hope this video was helpful and motivational for you. If it was, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.